Oh, I cannot hear anything. I cannot hear you. Okay.
안녕하십니까. 평창 평화 포럼에 오신 여러분을 환영합니다.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you all to the PyeongChang Peace Forum. The topic today is the Korea-U.S. alliance and peace on the Korean Peninsula. My name is Hoyoung, and I am the president of the University of Korean Studies. And until recently, I served as the Korean ambassador in the U.S., and I believe that that has also brought me to this occasion today. Now, allow me to briefly introduce the session today. Now, first, we will be hearing from the two federal congresspersons of the U.S., and one is a former congressperson, Mr. Kim Chang-jun, if I may briefly introduce him. Now, as a Korean American, he is the first Korean American to serve as a congressperson in the U.S. at the federal level, so quite a big achievement. And he is still quite active, and currently he is leading the Kim Chang-jun Korea-U.S. Research Center. And the second congratulatory remarks will be delivered by the current congressperson, Young Kim. And currently in the Federal Congress of the U.S., there are 4 Korean Americans. So we can also see that there is a growing share of Korean Americans in the mainstream politics in the U.S. Now, Congressperson Young Kim hails from the constituency of the LA, where there is a big Korean American population, and also she's serving and contributing to promoting the relations between the two countries. So we'll hear from the two persons in the way of congratulatory remarks, and then we will be having a panel discussion with 4 participants. So allow me to introduce the 4 panelists. From the Korean side, we have Professor Kim Woosang from Yonsei University. Now, Professor Kim is not only an outstanding political scientist, he was also the head of the Korea Foundation, and he also served as the Korean ambassador to Australia. So indeed, the representative scholar in the field of politics of Korea. And second is General Kyungsoo. Now, General Kyungsoo, starting from a low-ranking officer, he has made a big contribution to the Korea-U.S. security alliance, and he also served in the embassy with me as a military attaché, and I know of his reputation as the foremost eligible person in the Korea-U.S. alliance.
And Honorable Louis Payne used to be the member of the House of Representatives, representing the Commonwealth of Virginia. And well, there are 2 things I should be telling you about that, which is that when he used to be a sitting member of the House of Representatives, he in fact founded something called Blue Dog Democrats. And Blue Dog Democrats, in fact, are a group of Democratic members of the House who in fact believe in something called bipartisanship. And then talking about bipartisanship, then if you look at politics in many of the countries these days, something we have to overcome is polarization of politics. And I have to tell you, Honorable Louis Payne, in fact, was thinking ahead in a sense, and then founding something called Blue Dog Democrats. Second thing I should be telling you about Honorable Louis Payne is he, in fact, is going to become the president of an institution, very important institution called FMC, that stands for Former Members of Congress. And I understand it, well, it has no less than 1,000 members, including President Biden and Vice President Harris. So it's a very important institution, I have to tell you. And then Honorable Louis Payne is going to be a president of FMC beginning from July. The second panelist coming from the US side would be Honorable John FASO, and John FASO used to be a member of the House of Representatives representing the state of New York. And again, there is something important I should be telling you about Honorable John FASO, which is when he used to be a sitting member of the House of Representatives, then he in fact used to be rated as 18th most bipartisan member of the House. So it is such an honor to be moderating a session of panel discussion with these 4 distinguished panelists coming from Korea and United States. So without further ado, we will invite Honorable Chang Jun Kim for his remarks.
PyeongChang Peace Forum 3 years ago to carry the spirit of 2018 PyeongChang Winter Olympic and to promote the message of peace conveyed during 2018 PyeongChang Olympics. PyeongChang Peace Forum is hosted by Gangwon Province every February in the peace city, PyeongChang, and it has been a very, very successful. This is a critical time for the Korea-U.S. alliance, and we must strengthen the 2 countries' friendship. This peace forum is a great opportunity for a face-to-face encounter leading to peace talks on all levels of expertise. I'm glad to have former U.S. Ambassador on moderating today's forum. He's an expert in the major subject matter, and I hope there's a good outcome from the discussions. Also, I would like to welcome 2 panelists from the former member association, my dear colleagues, Honorable PAYNE and Honorable John FASO. They both visited Korea recently as an ex-DEL group, and they both are experts in the subject matter. For the Korean side, I want to welcome Professor Woosang and former General Kyungsoo SHIN. They are also the experts in the category, so it will be exciting to watch the forum for the next 9 minutes. Again, thank you for your participation and wishing you Happy New Year.
Okay. I'm honored to be with you all at this PyeongChang Peace Forum as we work together to restore lasting peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. I'm an immigrant from South Korea who grew up in the aftermath of the Korean War. I'm right now one of the first Korean American women to serve in Congress and also served as vice ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia, the Pacific, Central Asia, and non-proliferation. Therefore, restoring peace is personal to me. I'm committed to working on policies in Congress that strengthen our U.S.-South Korea partnership, promote human rights, and ensure the Kim regime commits and acts on complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. I strongly believe that trilateral cooperation is crucial to maintaining regional stability in East Asia. The United States must continue to lead and encourage close coordination between South Korea and Japan on responding to and preparing for threats from North Korea that go beyond basic intelligence sharing. In order to accomplish this, we need to move forward as a united front to ensure a secure and stable region for all, with a strong U.S., Republic of Korea, and Japan trilateral partnership. History, how we remember it and teach it to the next generation, is as important and relevant as ever. At the same time, we must also remember that given the threats we face today, the highest priority for all of us should be the continued security and prosperity of alliance. Given the challenges we face, we must address these as a united front. I hope the leaders of the United States, South Korea, and Japan will have the courage to push forward and prioritize the future of their country and their relationships with their allies. I want to thank everyone who is with us at today's forum as we discuss ways to promote shared peace, and I look forward to more conversations and meaningful actions to make this a reality. Thank you.
김창준 의원님 그리고 그 영킴
Thank you
의원님.
very much. So that was the congresspersons Kim Chang-jun and Young Kim. So I'd like to once again thank them very much for giving us the congratulatory remarks despite their very busy schedule. Now, as I have mentioned earlier, we have 4 panelists in this discussion, and now I would like to invite them to open our discussion under the topic of peace on the Korean Peninsula. Now, actually, this discussion will take place under 3 topics. Now, first is the North Korean nuclear issue. Second is the Indo-Pacific cooperation. And third would be the Korea-US alliance issue. So these are the 3 underlying topics for the session today. Now, having said that, we have to, so the time given to us is until 11:30. So my idea is that I would also like to allot about 20 minutes to have a discussion amongst the panelists with each other from about 11:10 to 11:30. So then in the time of the panel discussion, then for those who are watching this streaming, then you may also muster some of your questions and to be delivered to the panelists. But also please remember that if the question is too prolonged, then it will leave no time for the panelists to respond. So I would like to ask that the question be kept within 1 minute. And with that, let us begin the panel discussion.
And the Honorable PAYNE, as a matter of fact, we are attending PyeongChang Peace Conference. And in PyeongChang, 4 years ago, there was Winter Olympic Games took place in PyeongChang. So I think the good place to start our discussion would be PyeongChang Olympics, Winter Olympics of 2018. North Korea participated at PyeongChang Winter Olympics and then started, I have to say, flurry of diplomatic activities with North Korea. So there were no less than 3 summit meetings between South Korea and North Korea, and there were no less than 2 summit meetings between North Korea and United States. But all of it, in fact, came to a collapse in February 2019, when there was second summit between North Korea and United States. And then it's already 3 years, almost 3 years since then, since the collapse of Hanoi discussions. It's almost 3 years. And then if anything, my observation is things are even more difficult today with respect to denuclearization of North Korea, with respect to relationship with North Korea. So I guess maybe in order to move ahead, we in fact should be learning a certain lesson from what we experienced over the past 4 years. So my first question for you, Honorable PAYNE, would be, well, what would be the lessons that we could be getting out of those 4 years of our experiences of dealing with North Korea?
We cannot hear you.
You cannot hear me?
No, Honorable PAYNE.
I'm sorry, I was
Okay,
on mute.
all right.
Thank you all very much, and thank you, Ambassador Ahn, for that very kind introduction and the kind comments about the former members of Congress, FMC. We're very pleased and proud of what we do as an organization, and hopefully we will always continue to make a difference as we move ahead. Also, thank you for being the moderator, and thank you for your service. As you performed great service for your country and for the U.S. when you served as the ambassador from South Korea to the U.S. for 4 years and did that so well. Very good question. And I think you correctly said that things might be more difficult today than they were 4 years ago after the diplomatic flurry of activity. But I don't think, I guess lesson number 1 would be that I don't think we could say that simply because we can't see the good result that these were failed efforts or that diplomacy is a failure. I think that in terms of the sessions between President Trump and President Kim. Certainly out of that, we saw that North Korea that came out of isolation. I think the people in the United States were very focused on that, and there was a lot that was learned by a large number of people in the United States about what goes on the peninsula of Korea, and why the relationship that we have with the Republic of Korea or South Korea is so very important. So I think those were positives that came out of those discussions, although you're right, we can't see a lot of other results. And President Moon and President Kim had the 3 summits, and I think there was progress that was made there. I remember when I was in Korea 3 years ago, traveled to the DMZ and met with the ROK Army folks who were there. They were then working with the North Korean soldiers on finding the remains of those who were missing in action. And they commented that this was a situation where they felt that they were learning and working together, and while it was a small task, it was potentially something that could lead to bigger things. And I think out of that, I think 40 remains were found, and 40 families learned more about their loved one who died during the Korean War. So I think that we shouldn't give up on diplomacy, I guess, is lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, and you well know this as a diplomat, is diplomacy is not about speed. Diplomacy is something that takes patience. It takes time to begin so that you can build trust. You have to listen to the other side. You have to know what they want and what they're trying to achieve. And so maybe the second lesson learned would be that we need to continue to go about this, but go about it maybe in a more patient, thoughtful way, and not expect great results in a hurry. And I think that leads us maybe to the third point, lesson learned, and that is that we in the US and you in South Korea, we can do more when we work together than when we try to go alone and do something that we're not really keeping the other side informed or participating with the other side. And that's why I think President Biden's calibrated, practical approach that he has laid out is a good one, so that we in the US and you in South Korea can look at this. He has made the offer to meet with or begin diplomacy with President Kim. And of course, that has not been reciprocated at this point. But I think things are different. I think all of us have gone through COVID. It's been particularly a very difficult situation in North Korea. And I am hopeful that soon we'll see the opportunity present itself and be back on the diplomatic track with North Korea.
Thank you, Honorable Payne. Well, as a matter of fact, I think, Honorable Payne strongly believes in the possibility of diplomacy. And then Honorable Payne seems to be thinking that, well, the core value of diplomacy is patience. And then, as a matter of fact, in that sense, what President Biden is trying to do with respect to North Korea, that is to say, continues to offer the chances of opportunities of that dialogue. I think that is the right approach. I think that is the main message we are getting from Honorable Payne. And on that basis, let me try to turn to you, Professor Kim, which is that, well, we certainly appreciate the value of dialogue. We certainly appreciate the value of diplomacy. But at the same time, something we experienced over all these years is, well, North Korea seems to be, doesn't stop at all in developing its nuclear capability, in developing its missile capability. And then because of it, well, we are hearing that even during the past 3 or 4 years, North Korea in fact doubled the number of its warheads. And then the development of its missile technology is putting a lot of fear in the minds of South Korean watchers. And then I think it is for that reason that increasing number of South Koreans, they are wondering about the effectiveness of extended deterrence being offered by the United States. So some of them are saying, well, as a matter of fact, in order to improve the credibility in the extended deterrence, then United States must redeploy the tactical nuclear weapons in South Korea, or United States must offer something like a NATO-style nuclear planning group. Or in some extreme cases, some people are arguing South Korea must go for the nuclear option. Then I was quite surprised this morning when I read the recent opinion survey, according to which more than 70% of South Korean citizens, they said, well, this is the time when we must seriously thinking about having nuclear option. So we are watching all of it. And where do you stand on this critically important issue? That is to say, effectiveness of deterrence.
Okay, thank you for your question. By responding to Honorable Payne's, and I'll give my answer to your question. I fully agree with Honorable Payne's comment, meaning the lessons that we've learned from those meetings. Those meetings actually were historic, we can say. It's not a failed effort, and we should also not give up diplomacy, and we should be patient in accomplishing what we expect. But these historic meetings, we call, reminds me of Albert Einstein's saying. He said that doing the same thing over and over and expecting different result is insanity. There were several important meetings, and out of those meetings, we had important agreements to deal with North Korean denuclearization of North Korean nuclear weapons, especially including September 19th, 2005 joint statement. But there has been no progress at all. Instead, North Korea now became de facto nuclear power. So one of the lessons we learned, I can say, is that do not easily trust and always verify. The second comments, before I answer to my question, there still is no agreement on the definition of denuclearization. Is denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula the same as denuclearization of North Korea? I do not think so. And as Honorable Congresswoman Young Kim has mentioned, she mentioned CBID. I also agree with the CBID. So those two definitions should not be the same. But during those summit meetings in 2018, President Trump and Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in administration all used the same term of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But currently, Biden administration seems to use the term denuclearization of North Korea. So without fixing this problem, of difference of definition, I think that it seems to be very, very difficult to resolve North Korean nuclear problem. To answer to my question, in January this year, North Korea test fired 7 times its missiles, including hypersonic glide vehicles and intermediate range ballistic missile. The hypersonic glide vehicle can glide at a hypersonic speed of Mach 5 or even higher at an altitude of about 30 to 70 kilometers, changing its direction in the atmosphere, and it moves on an unpredictable flight path. So it is very difficult to intercept with our current missile defense systems. The ROK military is developing so-called three-axis defensive system, which consists of first, the kill chain preemptive strike platform. Second was a Korea air and missile defense system. And third, the Korea massive punishment and retaliation. It is an operational plan to incapacitate the North Korean leadership in a major conflict. The ROK military has also installed the THAAD system. But with all these, we are still not so sure that they can intercept all the incoming missiles from the north. So the best thing to do is to deter North Korea's potential aggression. And since the North Korea now has a nuclear capability, some experts and politicians in Seoul suggest redeployment of US tactical nuclear weapons, or even argue to develop our own nuclear capability. Some also talk about NATO-style nuclear sharing. I think you must have read this article, this column in the Wall Street Journal. Recently, Jennifer Lind and Daryl Press published, co-authored the article suggesting that the best option that the United States can choose is to let South Korea develop its own nuclear weapons, and argue that it is legal and justified based on Article 10 of the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That is, South Korea's development of its own nuclear weapons is a legitimate response to North Korea's nuclear threats. So therefore, it is illegal and justified. That's their argument. But I do not agree with these options of redeploying tactical nuclear weapons or developing its own, meaning our own nuclear weapons. Redeployment of tactical nuclear weapons or development of our own nuclear capability will send a wrong signal that we acknowledge North Korea as already de facto nuclear power. And I do not think that the United States will agree with these options of redeploying its tactical nuclear weapons in the South Korean soil, or of acknowledging South Korea starting its own nuclear weapons program. For that reason, I do not suggest that NATO-style nuclear sharing either. Instead, we need to strengthen our bilateral alliance, just like Ambassador Ahn has mentioned. You know, we have to demonstrate that the Korea-US alliance is always ready to deter North Korea's potential aggression. To increase that credibility of the extended deterrence provided by the United States, we need to have, I suggest that we need to have a regular-based joint military exercises from time to time, mobilizing even US strategic weapons, such as aircraft carriers and the strategic bombers. Since 2018 Singapore summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, our major regular-based joint military exercises have been all suspended. Those must be resumed to increase our credibility of extended deterrence provided by the United States. In 2016, the ROK-U.S. alliance has established called Extended Deterrence Strategy and Consultation Group. We need to fully operate this kind of meeting regularly to reinforce the United States' extended deterrence against North Korea's nuclear threat.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Well, as a matter of fact, I think he speaks for a large number of, well, quote-unquote professionals in Korea when he says, well, redeployment of tactical nuclear weapons or NATO-style nuclear planning group or a Korean nuclear program for one reason and another would not be practical. And then for the reason, maybe further strengthening the alliance between Korea and then the United States, that in fact would be the most practical means of further strengthening extended deterrence. So thank you so much, Professor Kim. So against what we heard from Honorable PAYNE and from Professor Kim, Honorable John FASO, let me turn to you, which is that I think there are three important elements for North Korean denuclearization, which is engagement, and then there was Honorable PAYNE, who talked about the importance of engagement, and deterrence, which in fact has been emphasized by Professor Kim. And then there's a third element, which is sanction. And then with respect to sanction, then of course, United Nations Security Council, it passed no less than 9 important Security Council resolutions in order to stop North Korea from further developing nuclear weapons. But at the same time, what is happening today is not all United Nations member countries are fully complying with those sanctions. For example, there is a committee called 1718 Committee, and 1718 Committee comes up with report of implementation of all those resolutions. And then every time, then the report of 1718 Committee talks about non-compliance by one single member of the United Nations, which is China. And then it is not just one single member. Why? Because 90% of North Korean trade is being done, export and import, 90% of North Korean trade is being done with China. So when China does not comply with UN Security Council resolutions, then unfortunately, those resolutions cannot be effective. So my question for you, Honorable FASO, would be this, which is, would there be any means we in fact could be employing in order to encourage China to be complying more, say, effectively with all those Security Council resolutions?
We cannot hear you.
Well, John FASO.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure, sure.
Yes. Ambassador An, thank you so much. And thank you for your service. It's great to be part of this group with my colleague L.F. PAYNE as a former member of Congress. And I also have to say thank you to my friend Jay and Jennifer Kim for being so thoughtful and in encouraging our participation here tonight or this morning. I think the problem, it definitely comes back to China. North Korea acts as a little cat's paw for China. China allows it to do what it does. It facilitates enough trade and commerce with North Korea in order to enable the North to continue what it's doing. Those resolutions, I believe, Ambassador, date from 2006. China has not complied. And I think, you know, all of these issues that we're going to discuss here tonight in this Peace Forum stem back to the fact that China is newly emergent in the last 20 years as an economic, political, and military power. It is asserting itself across the world, not just in Asia and in East Asia and in Southeast Asia, but throughout the world. And it is a force that has to be reckoned with. And I think that one of the things that we as democracies fail to understand, and many perhaps of our people do not understand, we operate in 4-year presidential cycles in the United States. Korea now, you're about to have your presidential election. It's a 5-year cycle. But the United States, this political cycle seems never ending. And I think that we do not have a long-term strategy sufficiently. We have to adopt a strategic patience when it comes to dealing with China and with issues such as North Korea. And that strategic patience would say, I believe, that we need to make it plain. We have been in the Republic of Korea working hand in hand with the people and the military and the government of South Korea for over 70 years now. And we should make it plain that we intend to stay there another 70 years if the people of Korea wish us to do so, and I believe they will, and make it plain that we are not just simply playing for a next 2 years or next 4 years to try to get something done. Make it plain to China and to North Korea and to our friends and allies in South Korea that we are with you and that we are going to, on a bipartisan basis from the United States, assert a strategic patience in terms of dealing with this issue. And that means enhancing our communications and our trade and our commerce with one another. That means enhancing the democratic principles that we hold dear and that South Korea for the last 20 years or so has shown itself to be exemplary in that regard. And that means also doing things, as Professor Kim said, reestablishing those joint military exercises. Not doing it on a provocative way, but saying this is the normal course of business that allies, friends, and compatriots share. That we are not in this for a short-term gain. It is not a strategy where we hope to be able to conclude something with North Korea. North Korea is not going to come to the table when they feel they have an upper hand. They have an upper hand because China is permitting them to have it. We need to be resolute. We need to enhance our defenses. We need to collaborate with Japan and South Korea and other nations in East Asia, because we need to show a strong, resolute front, not just to Kim Jong-un, but to China. And if we exercise strategic patience and we make it plain that we are going to continue to be there another 70 years if need be, or 170 years if need be, that will send a message to China and to the North that the United States is not going to cut and run. Because that is a concern that I know that some of our friends and allies have felt in recent years. And we need to make it plain that our strategic interests are with the free people of South Korea, and that the best way to preserve peace in Northeast Asia is to be resolute in our defense and our commitment to one another.
Well, thank you so much, Honorable John Fester. I think it is very interesting in the sense that, well, my question for Professor Kim was, well, how could we further strengthen extended deterrence? And at the end of the day, what Professor Kim responded was that through further strengthening alliance between Korea and the United States. And then now my question for Honorable John Fester was this, which is that how to deal with China not complying with Security Council resolutions. And if I understood the Honorable John Fester correctly, then his answer was again the same thing, which is that, well, we must let China understand how much we appreciate, between Korea and United States, how much we appreciate this alliance between Korea and the United States. That has been there for 70 years, but that in fact is going to be there for another 70 years or 170 years. So in other words, they may be separate questions, but at the same time, again, the answer could be the same answer, which is just through further strengthening the alliance between Korea and the United States. Which reminds me.
Could I just add one other thing?
Oh, sure. Please.
The Chinese and the North Koreans want to divide us. They want to divide the United States and the Republic of Korea. They want to create doubt in Northeast Asia among Japan, South Korea, the United States, and others, that whether we will still be there. And we have to reinforce it, say, we don't have any doubt. This is where our policy is. This is where our strategic interest lies. And that's why standing shoulder to shoulder with the people of South Korea is the best way to assure peace, and the only way in the long run to perhaps hopefully change the policy that takes place in the North.
Right. Well, Honorable Professor, I totally agree with you. And then I think it was for the reason that when President Biden came back and his message was United States is back, then that in fact was a message which was much appreciated by not only Korea, but by a large number of countries in the Asia Pacific. So thank you so much. So there were 3 questions that we discussed related with North Korean nuclear issue. From there, let us just move on to the next set of issues, which is in the Pacific. It's a huge area. And the 4th question goes to General SHIN. And my question to you would be this, which is that I just talked about President Biden coming back, and then he said United States is back, and then we understand what he means by that, which is further strengthen. I mean, United States is ready to further strengthen the relationship with the allies in Europe as well as in Asia Pacific. But at the same time, this rivalry or this tension between China and United States is becoming more and more obvious. It used to be sector-specific tensions, but now it seems to be across the whole board kind of comprehensive kind of tension between China and then the United States, which makes certain quarters of Koreans think, how do we respond to this tension between United States and China? Maybe it may be safest for us, Korea, not to take sides, but at the same time, just look upon the issue, merit of the issue, and decide our position issue by issue by issue. So there are a certain group of people who think that way, which in fact is broadly called as a strategic ambiguity. And this is a question I want to raise with you. What do you think about such a view, which I would call strategic ambiguity?
Sir, thank you, and Ambassador An, my former boss, and it is my great honor to be in this part of the panel discussion today. And I am actually now the Secretary General of the Korea-U.S. Alliance Foundation, and I'm working together with the Korea Defense Veterans Association in the United States. And may I comment just two things that from the previous discussion? Is that okay before?
Of course, please. You are very welcome to do that.
I'd like to comment two things. It's about that strategic patience. And many of the Honorable FASO and the PAYNE and the Professor Kim mentioned about the denuclearization policy of the North Korea. And actually, my point is that I can't see any difference between the Obama administration's strategic patience and this current Biden administration's policy. And I think that the current Biden's, even though they are saying like a practical engagement approach, but I cannot see the difference. And to me, it looks like a kind of a strategic patience 2.0. And I don't know how we can denuclearize North Korea in this current policy. That is actually my first observation of the first discussion. Second one is about extended deterrence. I actually negotiated many times about extended deterrence with my counterpart in Pentagon. And actually, current situation is quite different, very different from the situation in 5 years ago and 10 years ago and 15 years ago. And we have some progress in the extended deterrence, but I don't think it is enough to reassure that the South Koreans against the North Korean nuclear threat is growing. It's a more serious threat nowadays. We need something different. We need something strong measures to deter North Korean nuclear and the missile growing capabilities. And as I know that when the U.S. they implement that extended deterrence in Europe, and now we are saying that like nuclear sharing, adopting nuclear sharing, and someone, as the Ambassador mentioned, that someone is saying that we need to possess the nuclear capability. We need to develop some nuclear capabilities programs. And the reason is that currently extended deterrence cannot assure our Koreans, South Koreans. We need something. We believe that North Koreans will not give up their nuclear ambition. They will continuously even though now we are implementing that the strategic patience, but that North Korea, they continuously growing they're increasing their nuclear capabilities. And we need more reassurance. We are talking about not the deterrence, but that we need assurance to South Korean people. South Korean people believe that this is not safe, this is not enough. So our colleagues in the United States think about that something different, something more, like to assure our South Korean peoples. If not, South Koreans may have to think about that nuclear program, our own nuclear program. That's my points on the first discussion. And regarding to China, somebody is saying that about the South Korean heavy reliance on China economically. So our strategy should be ambiguous or dubious between the US and China. But I don't think so. South Korea's actually dubious strategy was not appropriate, but it was possible until China concealed these intentions and made its strategy explicit. But it's different, very different now. They're executing coercive diplomacy and expanding their military capabilities substantially under the communism and socialism. I believe the West Sea of the Korean Peninsula already under the influence of China. They're expanding their influence militarily to the East Coast. And in 2035, based on the Indo-Pacific Command's estimate, their evaluation is that in 2035, China will extend their influence into the half of the Pacific Ocean. And so I think we need something, you need to make a decision now. But regarding that taking sides issue, I think you have already, South Korea already made a decision by choosing the United States when you signed the Mutual Defense Treaty in 1953 after the war against North Korea and China. If you have to make a choice again, we should think about that the shared values of liberal democracy, human rights, rule of law with the United States. We don't have any value that is shared with China. They are still communist and country. Korea has maintained strategic partnership, what you call, with China. But I think more accurately saying that has been just economic partnership, not the strategic partnership. We have not had any strategic cooperation, no strategic dialogue, no strategic commitment with China. I think China think that Korea, they consider Korea as a 소국, means small country, and they are saying that China is a big country. This is their understanding about the relationship between Korea and China, big country and small country, not the strategic partnership. So I think China is not actually a strategic partner. So it's time for South Korea to be more realistic and more reasonable. It's time to decide. I believe also our national interest, even in economy and the technology, I believe that our national interest also exists in the United States. I think these facts, what I actually mentioned, all these facts actually impact on the perspective of the Korean people. We have a more anti-China sentiment, especially the young generations, 20s and the 30s of the Korean people think that the more pro-United States and the more anti-China. It is quite a big shift from the previous actually Korean sentiment. So I believe that we will see the next government will see the more changes in this perspective regarding the China and the United States. This is all.
Thank you, General Shen. Well, I have to remind the audience that General Shen is a former general. And then as a general, his message was very clear. And I think the clearest part in his message was, well, Korea, it made a decision 70 years ago. And that, in fact, is not a viable question. Where should Korea stand? So that, in fact, was a very clear-cut answer coming from former general. And then, as a matter of fact, in the previous administration in the United States under President Trump, then Assistant Secretary of State for Asia and Pacific used to be one of the former general, General Stilwell. And then, as a matter of fact, this is precisely what General Stilwell said when there was certain question being discussed in Washington, D.C. about this subject. Then this is what General Stilwell said, which is that, isn't it the case that South Korea already made a decision 70 years ago? But anyhow, there was a very clear answer coming from General Shin. So, Honorable John FASO, next question goes to you. And then the thing is, last May last year, President Moon came to visit Washington, D.C. And then I have to remind you, he was the second head of government who came to meet, came to have person-to-person meeting with President Biden after Prime Minister Suga of Japan. He was the first, and President Moon was the second. And after the meeting, then there was a joint statement being issued between Korea and the United States. I read the joint statement, and I was very impressed with what the joint statement had to say, especially on the issue of Indo-Pacific, because I think it was the very first time that South Korean government expressed its commitment to free and open Indo-Pacific. So that, in fact, is the reason why I have to tell you, I was pleasantly surprised to read the joint statement. And then I was not alone. Large number of, say, commentators in South Korea, they were equally impressed about what the joint statement had to say. So that was nice and good. But at the same time, in the past about less than a year, then again, what we are often hearing in Seoul is, well, that was nice that President Moon expressed a commitment to free and open Indo-Pacific, but at the same time, there was no implementation of Korean commitment to free and open Indo-Pacific. So, well, my question for you, Honorable John FASO, would be this, which is that in order to implement this commitment to free and open Indo-Pacific, what do you think South Korea could do for the implementation?
Well, certainly, one of the things that it could do would be to become a formal member of the so-called Quad with India, Japan, and Australia. That would be one thing. But even if it chooses not to become a member of the Quad in a more formal way, there are other things that it can do with the members of the Quad and other South Asian nations, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, to reinforce the need for supply chains. To the COVID pandemic has put front and center in the minds of many Americans and others across the world about our unreasonable dependency upon China for critical materials like PPE, the protective garments that our healthcare professionals need, as well as certain medicines, etc. I think it's really important that the nations of East Asia and Southeast Asia stand together with the United States and Australia and India to collaborate on a multitude of fronts. Because again, it's back to this question of China. And I think China and its rise is going to be the factor that most preoccupies American policymakers for the next generation. And how do we deal with it? How do we coexist? But also, how do we make sure that there is a world order that depends upon freedom of trade, democratic rights for people in our societies, the rule of law. And on many, many fronts, China is not playing according to that game. They play according to a different set of rules. So I think it's going to be important. This is going to be a question for the new South Korean administration and president, but ultimately a question for the South Korean people. Do they want to reinforce their allegiances with other democratic nations and other nations who perhaps are not democratic, but who do not propose a hegemonistic policy as such as what China does? And we're seeing this, right now front and center in the United States, and Congressman PAYNE will I'm sure agree. We are very focused now on what is going on in Europe. What Putin is doing to Ukraine sends a very terrible, bad, and ominous signal around the world. And it is not a far leap to look at China's ambitions, what they have done to Hong Kong, breaking their treaty there, the threats to Taiwan, and many other human rights violations, the economic coercion that China has used against your nation, against South Korea, against Japan, against Australia, when policies do not fit the desires of the Chinese Communist Party. These are things that I think this is the overriding question in terms of South Korea and its relationship with the U.S. and other nations in Asia vis-a-vis China. You obviously have a close economic relationship with China. There's indispensable trade that takes place and tourism that takes place. But at the same time, the Chinese government does not share the values of South Korea. And I think that the South Korean people know that. And I think people around Asia, and certainly more and more people in the United States, are becoming aware of this. So I think the question of what South Korea does going forward is going to be heavily influenced by the choice that it makes in terms of where it wants to be. It cannot allow itself to be intimidated by China, because if it does, the intimidation and the threats and the coercion will never stop. It has to stand firm in terms of its own identity, its own values, its own beliefs, and not just simply pretend that the Chinese way is something that we can turn a blind eye to. So that's where I would leave it.
Thank you so much, Honorable FASO. Well, I think you're right in the sense that, well, when you talk about all different issues, whether it is about North Korean nuclear issue or whether it is about Korea's status in this broad picture of free and open in the Pacific, then we cannot avoid this discussion about China factor. So I think you're absolutely right about that. And then I also agree with your point about Quad, in the sense that Quad, because of which countries are participating in the Quad, and then what are the scope of issues that in fact are being, in a sense, attributed to the cooperation among Quad member countries. I think there is wide range of possibilities for Korea to participate in Quad activities, either broadly or on more specific issues. So thank you so much for that. So
Ambassador An, can I also?
Right, Professor Kim, please.
Okay. As you have mentioned, it was really surprisingly, we had a very nice joint statement last May in Washington, D.C. And how to implement, Honorable FASO also suggested, but I strongly believe that we should join the Quad, and we should not be intimidated by China. Joining Quad, the reason is not to contain China, but to contribute to maintain the rules-based regional order and free and open Indo-Pacific. I do not think that Quad can easily become a NATO-style alliance which could contain China, even if the United States and Japan, although they will not do it, but even though they try to make that develop that to a military alliance to other members. India and Australia may not support the idea. Korea does not want to face the situation in which the United States and China are involving in a military conflict in the region. Korea does not want to see that Quad becomes military alliance to compete with China. Therefore, Korea should become proactive and join the Quad. And although it is very less likely, but in case the United States and Japan want the Quad to become a military one, Korea should raise voice together with India and Australia, not to become a military alliance. In addition, Korea can raise voice together with all these members for freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific, the rules-based order, and human rights protection. If Korea is not a member, even if Korea raises its voice, it may not be seriously heard by other members. I understand that Kurt Campbell has suggested the Quad Plus, including Korea and Vietnam. And Jake Sullivan also suggested, he suggested the quintet, you know, for a Quad plus one more. So he suggested United Kingdom as another member of the quintet. The Honorable Nancy Pelosi, I remember, has also suggested to our President Moon to join the Quad. So there must be a room for Korea in the Quad, as long as Korea is willing to join the Quad. In addition to joining the Quad, I believe that Korea should join the even Indo-Pacific economic framework led by the Biden administration. In those cases, like Honorable FASO has suggested, mentioned that Korea should not be intimidated. We know that there may be severe economic retaliation, even more than THAAD-related economic retaliation by China. But Korea has to stand up against that kind of retaliation. Korea has to demonstrate that to protect its sovereignty and its national interest, Korea will never surrender to those kind of threats and retaliation. And Korea's response should be consistent and bipartisan. For some time, Korea may have to deal with serious economic costs. We all know that. But once China understands Korea's willingness, we say it's a red line to protect its sovereignty despite severe economic costs, China may not continue to retaliate Korea and punish Korea, because it'll push Korea farther away from itself. So I believe that both United States and China understand that Korea can be their good partner for many reasons. The more Korea demonstrates its strengthened military alliance relationship with the United States, the less likely China treats Korea as badly as it has done during the Moon administration. At least China will not want Korea to become its enemy. Many will believe that. Just like Korea, China will be willing to become a good economic partner as before. Therefore, instead of just reading faces or working a tightrope between the United States and China, Korea must consistently demonstrate its willingness to protect its sovereignty and work hard to keep especially the lead on the leading edge technologies, such as semiconductors, or batteries, or 5G or 6G technologies, so that we have to have something to demonstrate to both United States and China that we have a very important thing to cooperate, either of you. That must be our secret weapon. So we have to work very hard to develop this kind of, maintain this kind of lead on the leading edge technology, so that we can cooperate with the U.S. and also with China.
Well, Professor Kim, I have to say it was a powerful and very eloquent insistence, argument you made for why Korea should be joining the Quad. And then between Honorable Professor and then Professor Kim, there are two words which really attracted my attention. One word, sovereignty. The other word, coercion. And then, of course, those are two concepts which, in fact, are interrelated, two different sides of the same coin. And then the reason why I was attracted by those two expressions being used by Honorable John Faso and Professor Kim is because, as Honorable John Faso said, what is happening in Eastern Europe today, that is to say in Ukraine, because when membership of NATO and non-membership of NATO, I think one thing we clearly see in Ukraine is what's the difference between membership of NATO and then non-membership of NATO. That again would be another way of saying why this alliance between Korea and the United States is so important. So thank you so much. Well, Honorable PAYNE, let me turn to you, which is that just now we discussed about where Korea should stand in this very complicated relationship between United States and China on the one hand, and then at the same time, where Korea, what is the kind of role that Korea should be playing in this broad vision of free and open Indo-Pacific. So we had, I think we had nice discussions about those two very important issues, but at the same time, we should remind ourselves that in 2 weeks' time, precisely 2 weeks' time, we are going to have presidential election in Korea. So we are going to have a new government coming in. So, well, Honorable PAYNE, my question for you would be this, which is that you must, in fact, wish to make certain recommendations to the new government on these important issues. So what would be your recommendation to the new government?
Well, yeah, thank you very much for that question. And my colleague, John Faso and Professor Kim, I think have really done a very nice job of laying this out. I do understand that the two frontrunners in your presidential election, Mr. Lee and Mr. Yoon, are not steeped in foreign policy expertise. And I would hope that they would find Professor Kim and General SHIN and you, Mr. Ambassador, as a team of people to help them. And if they do, I think they'll make all the right decisions. But let me just say that you mentioned Russia and Ukraine, and on every TV in America, people are watching what's going on in Russia, and we're very, very concerned about that, and very concerned about our friends in the Ukraine. But the takeaway there is exactly what you just mentioned, and that is that this is a situation where it's an alliance, and it is just not the United States, or it's just not Germany, or it's just not the UK, but it's an alliance of people who share values and who share democracy and who share the idea of open markets and the rule of law. And we're seeing how important that is and how effective that can be as we look at what's unfolding in that part of the world. And I think as we look at what's going on in Asia, you know, the relationship between the U.S. and South Korea is one that is extremely important. The people in the U.S. consider South Korea and its people to be among not only their best allies, but their best friends. And my own experience, I was a young officer in the Army and stationed in Korea back in the 1970s, when Korea was really an emerging nation and an emerging economy. And it's truly amazing. It is truly a miracle on the Han to see what has happened in South Korea since those days to today. And I think all of you who participated in that should be just full of pride in terms of what you've accomplished as a nation and what you've done for your people in terms of being able to provide more opportunities and a better quality of life. So whoever the next president is, I think should adopt a notion that this is not simply a time to look inward. This is a time to project beyond the borders of South Korea. And the United States is waiting with open arms to work on this alliance that General SHIN spoke about. And it's one that I think it's been a good alliance. I mean, my own experience working with the ROK Army, and it was not only that I had troops who were, we call them KATUSAs, that was an acronym at the time, in my company as I was a company commander, but we also recognized what they did in Vietnam, and they were the best fighting force in Vietnam, and they've been with us in Iraq and Afghanistan, and wherever America has been, the Republic of Korea has been right there and providing the very best in terms of the military. But we could do that in areas, not just the military, but in other areas as well, and create an alliance that really would be significant for both the United States and for South Korea. And I think part of that would be South Korea taking a leadership role, becoming part of the Quad, and playing the role that Professor Kim just mentioned, one that could not only be a part of it, but take a leadership position in it and guide it in a way that could really create very positive results, not only for South Korea, the US, and throughout Asia, but throughout the world. So I guess those would be the sorts of things that I would say to the new administration. And I would hope that they would take advantage of and become, and that we can work together and build this alliance that we know is possible if we all work together on it.
Well, Honorable Payne, thank you so much. You just talked about your experiences being a company commander back in 1970s. And I joined Korean Foreign Service back in 1978. And then in 1978, when I joined Korean Foreign Service, per capita GDP of South Korea, it was $1,300. World average that year was $2,000. So in other words, Korea was short of, per capita GDP of South Korea was short of world average by $700. So in other words, 1978, Korea was still a very underdeveloped economy. Korea was still a very poor economy. Today, Korea is in fact a member of something called 30-50 Club, which is a country with more than 30,000 per capita GDP and 15 million population. So that's 30-50 group, and Korea is a member of 30-50 group. How many members are in the 30-50 group? 7. There are only 7 members in the 30-50 group. So we really came a long way, Honorable Payne. I have to agree with you. How did we do it? Or more specifically, what's the different paths we took between South Korea and North Korea? I think, Mr. Payne, well, Honorable Payne, I think you already put your finger on a very important, concept, which is outward-looking strategy of Korea. I think that, in fact, was a critical orientation that Korean government and Korean people took, which made it possible for us to catapult ourselves from $1,300 economy to 30-50 group membership. So thank you so much, Honorable Payne, for that. So they were the kind of questions we discussed under this broad rubric of free and open in the Pacific. So from those questions, let us move on to the third group of questions, which is the alliance between Korea and United States. So for that, let me turn to Professor Kim. And this question, in fact, is very closely related with this admirable point, which has been made by Honorable Payne, which is, well, this is 70 years. I mean, next year, we are going to commemorate 70 years of the alliance between Korea and the United States. And I think this would be a perfect time when we should be thinking about the future vision for the alliance between Korea and the United States. And I think there are two different visions and perceptions about the future of the alliance. On the one hand, there is a vision that Korea must, in fact, enhance the role of the alliance between Korea and the United States. and then try to come up with more areas where Korea and United States can work together and play more of a leadership. This is something which Honorable FASO said, which is something Honorable PAYNE said, which you said, so that we could be playing more leadership role. We, in fact, used to do some of it already, in the sense that where G20 process is something which comes up in my mind, or nuclear security process, that was again something which comes up in my mind, and global health security agenda, again, is something which comes up in mind. For all those processes, Korea worked very closely with United States, and then I think we in fact ended up by playing an appropriate role commensurate with our capability. So that is one vision. We must in fact continue to move ahead and then move outside and then play the leadership role. On the other hand, there is a vision which says, well, basically Korea-US alliance, it is to help Korea to defend against the security threat arising from North Korea. If you try to expand the scope of alliance between Korea and then the United States, in fact, it could be, in a sense, engaging Korea in unnecessary commitment or burden or trouble. So that they in fact are two rather different visions some people have about the future of the alliance between Korea and United States. And I'm curious to get to know your view on this important subject, particularly because you used to be the president of Korea Foundation.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador An. 50, 60 years ago, when South Korea barely survived from the devastation of the Korean War, South Korea was still not strong enough to stand alone. With the help of United States as our trustworthy ally, South Korea demonstrated to the world so-called the miracle of Han River with rapid economic development and process of democratization. Now, as you mentioned, Ambassador An mentioned, Korea became one of the strongest countries in the world, one of the 7 members of the 30-50 Club. When the Korea-US alliance was established in 1953, that asymmetric type of alliance was theoretically called security autonomy trade-off type, in which the United States provided security protection to Korea, and Korea provided a part of autonomy to the United States through providing military bases and peacetime and wartime operational control of the military to the commander of the United States forces in Korea. But now the alliance relationship is on a much more equal basis and tries to serve common interests of the 2 alliance partners, not only in the Korean Peninsula, but in the Indo-Pacific region and even at the global level. Therefore, the argument that the Korea-US alliance is only to protect Korea from North Korean potential aggression is not correct. It's really, as you say, it is a really old thinking. It's old thinking. We should become more flexible in dealing with the Korea-US alliance relationship. Now, North Korea's nuclear threat is not just against South Korea, but against the United States and Japan as well. So even in dealing with North Korea, it's not just for Korea's interest, but for the United States and for the regional interest. There are other threats to the Korea's security, as well as the United States and other countries in the Indo-Pacific. In the South China Sea and East China Sea, China claims its territoriality, and that is against the free and open navigation rights in the Indo-Pacific. If the SLOC, the sea lanes of communications, are blocked by China, economies of countries in the region, including Korea, will be totally devastated, and Korea alone cannot protect our slope. So to protect our economic security, we need to cooperate with our allies to protect this free and open slope. So there are much common interests at the regional and global levels to protect together. The United States and China are not only under trade war, but also under high-tech competition. In the 21st century, if there were wars going on, then the battlegrounds would be everywhere, not just in the military battlegrounds, but in the fourth industrial revolution technologies and trade area, cyberspace, aerospace, and so on. So there are many reasons for our alliance to be transformed into the alliance, not just for only the Korean Peninsula issue, but for the regional and global issue. So it should become much more flexible in dealing with all these issues. Frankly speaking, as Ambassador An also mentioned, I was really surprised when we read the joint statement during the summit last May in Washington, D.C. Moon administration agreed to oppose activities that undermine rules-based international order. Not just that, it talks about preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Moon administration also agreed to deepen the partnership in new areas such as climate change, global health, but also emerging technology issues. So many of us have been really surprised by that really nice, I can say that's another historic kind of joint statement. This March, we have the presidential election. Whoever wins, even though I support one side, but I should not mention that here. Whoever wins, our two allies must seek a comprehensive strategic alliance partnership, having deeper and more comprehensive dialogue and cooperation on many issues of economic, technology, and also security. There will be economic security and human security. All those issues, the Korea-U.S. alliance must become the linchpin of this, the security and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Well, out of the statement from Professor Kim, I think there are two terminologies which really attracted my attention, which is the economic security and human security. And then I think we in fact live in a world where this traditional concept of security in fact cannot but be associated with more comprehensive concept of security. So that I think is something we are experiencing, and then I think this is something we have to put in our mind as we think about the issue we are discussing for the time being, which is bilateral alliance between Korea and the United States. So next question goes to General SHIN. And General SHIN, as I already said, as a way of having him introduced to you, has watched the progress of the alliance between Korea and the United States at a very important level, which is the military level. And then something we are observing today in the military field would be this, which is the development of technology, which in fact are being introduced into, say the weapon system, into military tactics, even strategy. So these days we are seeing more and more, advanced technology kind of, equipments like drones, like ghost fleets, like cyber warfare, like space warfare, AI, big data, etc., etc. And then people often say that future battlefield would be dominated by those developments in technology. So I'm just listening to them. And then the question which comes up in my mind would be this, which is that where Korea-U.S. alliance, security alliance, in fact, at these developments in technology, developments in equipments, developments in tactic and strategy, are they being incorporated into this alliance between Korea and the United States? That is a question I want to raise with General Shin.
Sure, thank you. And I think both the ROK M&D, Ministry of National Defense, and the US DoD clearly recognize the importance and the necessity of cooperation in this area, AI, space, cyber, robotics. I think both DoD and the M&D believe that this is the future areas of cooperation. If you look at the joint communique of SEM, a security consultative meeting in 2015, both the ROK and the US have emphasized the importance of these areas. I think since then we have highlighted the cooperation in this area, and we have some progress, but still we need more efforts between both the Pentagon and the Korean Ministry of National Defense. I believe this is the future of especially in the military perspective, this is the future of alliance cooperation. And this is the way actually to prepare for the defense and the security on the Korean Peninsula in the future. And also, when if you consider the South Korean IT capabilities, I think we have a lot of opportunities which are mutually beneficial. I think we need more focus and investment. So the question is how you can achieve this cooperation. I believe you need to think about that. To achieve this objective, we need to think about defense industry cooperation and some interoperable weapons system, both in the United States and in Korea. In this perspective, I think I'd like to recommend two things. One is that about that air and missile defense system on the Korean Peninsula. We need some integrated ROK-U.S. air and missile defense systems on the Korean Peninsula. In this area, actually, and also the second recommendation is combined ROK-U.S. Cyber and Space Command and the Combined Forces Command. In this, in these efforts, I think we have a lot of opportunities to share that our technologies, and those actually develop their technologies together, and you can operationalize the capabilities on the Korean Peninsula. So I recommend that we need something tangible to achieve this objective. And however, there should be some preconditions that need to be reviewed and developed before the actual commitment. First one is about that you need to ensure security of the sensitive information and the technologies, both in Korea and in the United States. And because this is the one area that we need to address before this commitment. So this can actually increase our mutual trust in this cooperation. So my recommendation is that we need to achieve this objective through defense industry cooperation and interoperable weapon system on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you so much, General Shin. Well, I'm just watching the clock, and then this is already 11:29. And then before the session, then I promised I'm going to reserve about 20 minutes for an exchange with the audience. But at the same time, I'm just watching this, chatting on the YouTube. And then the thing is, two things. First of all, I in fact went over time. So this is already 11:29. So I'm sorry that I couldn't keep my commitment to the audience. But at the same time, I'm just checking with the chatting. And then I come to find that there are no substantive questions in my chatting. So I guess maybe we could be excused, or I could be excused for not having provided 20 minutes of exchange with the floor. But at the same time, let me thank you, Honorable PAYNE, Honorable FASO, Professor Kim, and General Shin for very enlightening comments you made. Well, as a matter of fact, I'm engaged in this kind of exchanges all the time. But I have to admit to you, today I have to tell you what I've been hearing from you. They, in fact, were something apart from what I usually hear from this kind of well, debate circles. So I should be thanking you, and then well, to the audience, well, from here I will switch to Korean. 제가 사실은 저기 끝에 한 20분을.
So originally I said that I would allocate 20 minutes Q&A session with the participants, and I was not able to keep to my commitment, uphold my commitment. However, I see via the YouTube chat that we covered most of the questions that were asked, such as the Russia-Ukraine situation and the security issues on the Korean Peninsula. And I think we have covered those questions through our discussion. So unfortunately, I think we will have to now wrap up the PyeongChang Peace Forum partner session 9, and I would like to thank Honorable FASO, PAYNE, Professor Kim, and General SHIN for their participation and their contributions to this discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hope to see you soon again.
Thank you.
감사합니다.
네,
감사합니다. Honorable Louis Payne, when actually